Hello, class. I hope you guys are doing well today. Not having to go in class in person, but at least being able to kind of wind down in your own space and just listen to this lecture this week. So let's go ahead and get started. We're focusing on communication skills and engagement, which is a great skill that you guys can absolutely practice this week and forevermore at your agency. I'm sure many of you have already practiced these things. All right, so as always, I like to just let you guys know what competency this is really focusing on. So, this is about demonstrating ethical and professional behavior. When it comes to communication, we want to remember how are we coming across, right? Are we coming across in a professional manner? Are we asking those questions? Are we being clear in our tone? Are we being direct so that people understand what it is we're trying to share with them? There are so many layers that go into this, and we're going to dive into that a little bit later in this lecture. So, what is communication? Of course, you all know what communication is, but I just wanted to share that here. It's a process in which one conveys information, right? So, you can convey information intentionally, like I said, by being direct, being intentional, and the things that you want to ask, whether that's an open ended question or a closed ended question to get a particular answer that you're looking for so that you can have a clear understanding of what the person you're talking to is sharing with you. And also, in terms of social work, we want to obviously develop and demonstrate competence in how we speak. That's what I was saying with that professionalism. We want to come from a place that we're speaking that sounds like we know what we're talking about, sounds like we have skill, we have knowledge, which you guys do, right? So continue to practice those things when you are speaking to your coworker, well, your coworkers, your clients, not just in the agency, but also beyond that as well. So, also demonstrating competence in your written communication. We're going to dive into that as well, but this may be, progress notes or case notes, things like that. We want to make sure that we're detailed and we communicate clearly in that way. And there's other forms of communication as far as electronic communication. And we're going to dive into what that media looks like, the different forms of communication. So, yeah, let's keep going. So, communication skills for integrated practice. So, as you saw on the last slide, there are different systems, different client systems that you can work with. As you guys know, micro, meso, and macro, those are different areas that we as social workers focus on. So, the micro level is really focusing on individuals and families, right? So, when we're communicating with this client system, a lot of what we do is active listening, right? We want to make sure we have a clear, understanding of what it is that they need from us, what issues that they maybe are presenting that we need to help work on with them. And of course, we need to also reflect back. You've heard me say that probably in every single class that we've had, but it is so essential. Of course, in this micro setting, you may be active listening, you may be taking notes on what was said, but reflecting back on what happened is very important to understand how to treat the individual or the family. You may hear my cat meowing in the background. I'm sorry. And then question asking as well. So question asking is more of like gathering information, really having, the skill to ask those particular questions so that you know how to best serve that client. So you got to make sure that you ask the right questions. That's why you have to reflect. Maybe you didn't ask the right questions in that client setting, but you reflected and you're like, hey, in our next session, we need to make sure we address this, this, and this so that I know how to best support you with what you're going through. So next up is the meso client system. So this can look like maybe a task group that you're treating. And again, communication can also be the same in terms of active listening, but I wanted to add reflecting back looks a little bit different. In this system, you have a group of individuals that are all in the same setting, right? So, of course, confidentiality gets discussed, but a lot of different information from individuals is shared. And so, in terms of reflecting back, This may be you, but this also may be other members in this group who are giving some reflection, giving some feedback. So keep that in mind that you may have to redirect the conversation differently, and you may have to redirect what that reflection looks like for other individuals, so that you guys can kind of stay on task. And then lastly, macro. So again, this is like the bigger communication. This is more of like agency communication, organizational communication. And here we see that there is formal and informal communication. So more formal communication, that can be maybe facilitating professional speech, or it could be a formal documentation, maybe communicating what it is that you need from this agency, and collaborating with this agency. And informal can be a little bit different, right? It's not as providing a paper form of communicating what you need. It can be maybe like a more of a meeting that you're in, and you're kind of just speaking on different topics of how you guys can advance this agency or collaborate with this organization. Okay. All right, so some interpersonal skills in social work. So, first, this is very important, right? The way that you approach someone, the way that you kind of set the tone, it really does lay a foundation. Excuse me. So, really having an understanding of how you perform these qualities in communication with an individual is essential, okay? So, here we see different things: warmth, empathy, respect, and genuineness. So we're going to go through a couple of things. First is your posture. Your posture can communicate something, right? It can communicate warmth. The way that you move, the way you hold yourself, that could encourage communication, or it could make someone maybe stand off a little bit. So, thinking about warmth and how you can really make someone feel welcome. We talked about that inclusion aspect, making someone feel like they're being included in the conversation, but also in addition to your movements, there are also your smile, right? Looking at them in their eyes, maybe motioning. You can't see, but I motion with my hands when I speak. And I think that shows a certain aspect of passion that I have when I'm speaking. And maybe gestures, looking around the room. Sometimes when I'm presenting, I walk around, right? Making sure that everybody can see me, making sure that I'm looking in people's eyes, right? I'm not slumping, my posture. I'm not tapping my fingers. I'm not looking sad. You do have to be engaged. You do have to show some kind of passion when you're speaking with someone, so that they know that they're important, that they're valued. So keeping that in mind, that there are different warmth cues that you can engage in. I know oftentimes when I'm speaking with others, I also like nod my head, to show that I'm in agreement, so that I understand something. I may even say, yeah, like, I know it sounds weird, but it just shows somebody like, okay, they're listening to me. Like they heard me. They're almost agreeing with me with whatever statement I just said. And that verbal agreement, I think, could be really essential. So these findings can be used in every area of work field, but it really is essential when it comes to social work, because I think as far as communication, making someone feel valued in that communication can definitely be a great first step to making them trust you and to build rapport with them. Okay, so some effective clinical skills. Let's talk about that. One, the best way to learn the best way to learn someone else is through interviewing them. So you guys will notice that there will be an activity in regards to interviewing, and some of these skills are really important that you can practice. So one, active listening. Really, that is simply being in the moment, hearing what someone else is saying, not being quick to speak or respond, but simply just being present, and hearing what they're saying, not interpreting what you think they said, truly actively listening to what they're saying. And I'm sure that you guys have practiced this skill in many ways when it comes to maybe listening to a friend or listening to a family member, or even wanting someone to actively listen to you with whatever it is that you wanted to convey to them. So, another skill is reflection. So, reflecting the feeling and the meaning of the context. So, of course, when someone is talking with you, they are trying to express and get you to understand maybe what they're feeling in that particular moment. So, again, as a social worker, we need to reflect on, okay, it's almost like putting yourself in their shoes in that moment in time and saying, what is it, that they're trying to convey to me? Okay, they're using these words, right? These are their words. Let me repeat their words back to them and not put words in their mouth. That is very important. Using open-ended questions to gather information. We talked about that. Really being intentional about the questions that you gather so that you can have a clear understanding on what they are trying to share with you. Reframing. Of course, there can be times where you are not certain on what the individual is trying to communicate to you. So you may have to not use their words. You may use different words to get a better understanding of what they are trying to say to you. And it's totally appropriate to reframe these things because in most cases, the client will be happy to share with you, no, that's not what I meant. Or they'll say, yeah, actually, like you may have given me a little bit, better words to use to express how I'm feeling. So reframing is really essential as well to make sure that you're on the same page. Summarizing. So this is really just how it sounds, kind of giving that brief summary at the end of the conversation to give you more clarification on what it is that the client was trying to share with you. Goal setting. So yes, this is something that we absolutely do when we're working with our clients. We want to establish goals. We want to make sure that we're on the same page, essentially. So if they're saying they're having maybe issues with mental health, then we want to maybe establish some goals around mental health, right? We don't want to completely shift the conversation and start helping them set goals for maybe it's school setting, right? Like that's totally different. That's not what we talked about. That's not what they shared. They're wanting to focus on mental health. So when it does come to goal setting, we want to make sure that we're planning different goals that will help them achieve, improvement in their mental health. And of course, as social workers, not only do we plan, but we also evaluate. And the reason being is we want to track the progress. We want to make sure that there is progress being made in that client session or just with that client in general. Okay? Something that I don't have on here is positive confrontation. And I've, talked a little bit about it so far in class, but as far as positive confrontation, sometimes there are moments where a conversation may not go so smoothly. There may be times where, like I said, you may have to redirect the conversation or you may have to confront them. And confront it sounds like an aggressive word, which is why I sometimes say carefront. But it is for the best interest of the client. We do want to make sure that we are addressing maybe some issues of hesitancy or denial towards making progress towards their goals. So that does happen. And when you do confront carefront, you do want to make sure that you're being clear so that the client understands, like, hey, there may be an issue that's going on and we need to address that. Okay. Okay. So nonverbal communication, we did address a little bit of this. So that's, eye contact, maybe your facial expression, your gesture, are you sitting up straight? Are you on the same level as your client? If you guys are in the same setting, are they standing and you're sitting? Are they sitting and you're standing? I think sometimes if you're standing over them, that could feel like some kind of superiority when that's not the case, right? We want to make sure that they feel included and that they feel welcome in that setting. Also, your body positioning, like your posture, I think we said that one already. Greetings. So are you initially coming in and saying, "Hey, how you doing?" Right? It sounds so basic, but it really could mean a lot to the client. It's like a first impression that you're giving them every time you see them. Your tone of voice, right? Do you sound gloomy? Do you sound irritated? Like, is there something that they can depict in your tone that maybe can make them not feel comfortable when talking with you? Um, Making sure that you're just being yourself. Don't put on and have a super high voice because you're trying to, show excitement. Truly just be yourself. I think that, like anyone else, we can kind of depict if that is genuine. Also, your dress and appearance, making sure that you are presentable. Is there anything that's going to distract them while you're having a conversation with them? Are you wearing a hat with feathers on it? And they're like, I can't focus because I see something else, right? We want to make sure that they feel comfortable and there's no distractions. And even in the media form. Of course, we know telehealth can take place, and when you're meeting with a client over a Zoom or whatever that may be, there may be distractions in your background. We want to make sure that the focus is on the client. Also, your movement. So I think it's perfect that the way you guys see me right now is just my head, because as I shared, like I'm totally using my hands, and that can absolutely be a distraction. So keeping that in mind. So also your nonverbal communication matches your oral communication. So if you are just like looking super unengaged, but then like your tone is really high and showing very much excitement, that could read a very different message. So be conscious of that. Be conscious of how both of those match. We want them to match. We want them to feel like, okay, this is a genuine conversation. And then keeping that in mind for your client as well. They could display some kind of communication that seems a little bit off, and pick up on those cues, because when they are presenting those cues to you, that could mean that your client is having a tough moment. It can signify a change in the client's, maybe their thought process. So please keep that in mind as you guys communicate with your clients. They could be sending a message to you non-verbally, and that's why it's important to actively listen and engage. Okay, so let's get into some interviewing and social work. So, engaging a client system in a purposeful conversation that allows explorations and processing of an issue, and can also be referred to as a client encounter or exchange that is interactive. Essentially, all that is saying is this is what interviewing looks like in the field. So, you guys have already done different forms of interviewing when you're introducing yourself to your coworker, your new coworkers, or your clients. Maybe you've sat in on an intake session and you've had to gather information about a client. So that's absolutely an interview as well. Explaining your role. I can't see what the rest of this. Let me see. Explaining your role, of course, in your workforce, your purpose, and why you're there in that moment in time. We talked about discussing informed consent, right? That's absolutely an interview. We have to explain what that process is, engage the client to make sure they understand, and address any of those concerns, right? That's an interview, right? You're asking questions, gathering information, writing it down, etc. And also confidentiality. That's also an interview, right? You're making sure that you guys are on the same page. You guys understand what's going on. So it's a structure that is necessary to evaluate oral communication skills. Interviewing is absolutely a process that can demonstrate your competency in using empathy and using your reflection, even interpersonal skills, right? How do you engage your client? How are you assessing and what the things that they said? How are you intervening, right, and evaluating what stage they're at, what level that they're at, as far as the progress that they're making and the goals that you guys have set. Okay, so just to kind of break it down a little bit more, there is this tree analogy that I have seen in the book, your textbook, that you guys can kind of relate to in terms of what this looks like. So, as far as interviewing, course, we can see like a big tree, right? We're going to start at the bottom, start at the roots. So the roots, those are the issues that maybe your client is bringing to your attention. So, excuse me, I shared earlier, mental health can be an issue that they're sharing with you, maybe substance abuse, um, childhood trauma that they're experiencing, maybe housing. There's so many different things that could be presented to you right upon the interview with the client. So those are what we're going to call the roots. Now let's focus up, right? The trunk. The trunk is the overall foundation, or maybe the purpose of the interview. So maybe this client is at a counseling service and they're trying to see what services that they can, what referral services that they could be utilizing at your agency so that they can work on their issue that they're trying to get through. So essentially, this is like the purpose of the meeting. So this is like what we're going to work on while we're here. So let's say the issue is substance abuse. Maybe we can refer them to um, a substance abuse program, or maybe we can share with them different resources that they could utilize to better help themselves. And then the branches. So the branches are going to symbolize the direction that the conversation can take. It's really going to focus on, for the client, why is this important? Why are you here? Let's focus on, again, what are your goals, right? And that can obviously go so many different ways, which is a great symbolism for branches, because there's so many different conversations that can be had, and that's going to help guide you on how to proceed. So again, this is like developing your skill in directing that conversation, as well as having an idea on where the conversation is needed. So gauging those keywords, the things that the client is saying, to have a better understanding of where the conversation needs to kind of go next. Okay. So documenting in social work, so recording, documenting, interviewing, obviously is a very useful tool. Again, I talked about it a little bit earlier, but this is something that you can absolutely practice at your agency. You can absolutely, let's say you're meeting, not even a formal meeting with a client, but it's informal. You sat with them, you asked them how their weekend was going. Maybe you asked them what they did over the weekend. Maybe they shared with you that they had an issue that took place and you're following up with your supervisor about it. A good way for you to practice that interaction is just document it. Document a draft of what you think a social worker would write in that situation, and bring it to your supervisor meeting and say, hey, I met with so and so last week and this is what I documented. What would you suggest that I should add if this was a formal client note? What would you suggest that I take away? Like, sometimes there's too much detail. We want to be absolutely detailed in our writing, but we also want to make sure that it is intentional. We don't want to add too much where it just doesn't make sense. Like the client was wearing a purple shirt with stripes on it. That may not be so important. Maybe discussing the content of what was shared is a more, better focus to add to. Other ways that you can practice this is recording yourself. So maybe recording yourself in a video, looking back on a video of you presenting maybe a class project, so you can see, okay, what did my presentation give off? Did it give welcoming? Did it give confident? Different things like that. And even audio. I know a lot of times we always critique ourselves and how we sound in the audio, but listening back to that gives you a great understanding of what your tone does sound like when you are speaking with someone else. So please practice this. Please find ways to practice this. That can absolutely be a way to hit a competency task in your learning plan. And we all know we're trying to hit those goals. So definitely think outside the box as far as how you can increase your self-awareness, how you can reflect on your documentation skills, and this integrate theory and practice, and finally promoting more satisfaction and self-confidence so that you can feel like you're prepared for when you guys do start your jobs in the work field. Okay, so we did talk about some of these different ways that written communication skills can be used in social work. So, of course, client records, we talked about, there may be times where you're going to have to document the client's records and what you guys maybe have agreed to as far as consent and confidentiality. We want to make sure that all the boxes are checked. So, client records is absolutely something that you want to make sure you practice writing. Official documents. Um, of course, these are usually kept in a confidential space. Um, some agencies still have paper copies where they maybe keep it up in a locked space, a file cabinet that someone may know the code to or has a key to. But of course, there are other forms as well. A lot of folks have gone more of the electronic route where they can put a passcode in to access certain official documents. Intake reports, initially meeting with the client, you want to make sure that you have all of the intake documents kept in a safe place that lets you know anybody who's coming into your agency that may be on a more official corporate level understand that we have followed our steps and made sure that our clients understand what our services are and that they have agreed to that. Treatment forms, release of information, case notes, assessments, all of these things. In most cases, when you are doing this, whether it's electronic or a paper form, you as a social worker are signing off on this document. So whatever engage, so for example, something that of course I do assessments with my residents, maybe assessing their cognitive ability, if they've had a decline or if they've had any improvement. And I document that after every assessment. I have to put my signature in and say that I did participate in this assessment with my client here, and that I was the interviewer and they were the interviewee. So you absolutely have to sign off on all of those things. And it holds you accountable. It makes you have maybe a little more pressure to ensure that what you're documenting is appropriate. There's been times where I've said to my supervisor, hey, I'm going to save this as a draft because I want you to review it to make sure that what I'm saying sounds right. And I think that your supervisors would do the same thing. They would absolutely review your documentation so that we can, make sure that it sounds right and appropriate. Okay. So also we have incident reports. That's a huge thing that you absolutely have to make sure you're documenting, and those are a lot more detailed. Those have a lot more information so that it's almost like you can have a very clear picture of what exactly happened. And sometimes with incident reports, actually most times they're being reviewed by not only the people at your agency, but people above your agency. In some cases, that may mean someone has to come out to your agency to really follow up and investigate the incident. So when it comes to incident reports, it is so important that you provide clear information. And again, you're going to have to sign off on that. So making sure that it's factual and making sure that, of course, it's honest. That's an ethical thing that we absolutely have to abide by as social workers. Call logs, service plan, discharge reports, transfer summary. These all look different depending on the agency that you're at, but absolutely is very important in regards to documentation. Okay. Okay. So telephone communication. So my question to you is, how would you rate your telephone communication confidence? Like, you gotta think about that, right? Of course, I always share a little bit of a story, but I know that when I was younger, my younger brother, he was really had low confidence in how he would communicate on the phone. So there would be times where we were maybe gonna order a pizza, and he'd be like, "Nope, can't do it. Don't want to ask. Like, don't even want to engage. Don't even want to like communicate with the person across from the or through the phone. Like, I just can't do it." And so he really had to grow into that communication. And now he's definitely gotten better with it, but still to this day, he's like, I really kind of don't prefer to talk over the phone because I don't want to stutter. I don't want to, have that awkward silence. I don't want to not hear them and have to re-ask them, what did you say? Now, you guys have heard me speak I'm confident in how I speak, but I also know that I have flaws. I know that I may stutter on a word or that I may pause on something, but I'm still confident in how I communicate because it's just a part of who I am, you know? So, in regards to telephone communication, we do spend a lot of time with clients on the phone, whether we're asking them questions. Maybe we missed a question in the intake and we forgot to ask them for their email, you know, so you may end up calling them to gather more information. You also talk to other professionals about clients' progress, right? Have you ever got a call when you weren't at work and it was about work? Like, yeah, we have to make sure that we're communicating professional. We have to make sure that, you know, we still answer the phone and we can be clear and concise on what it is we have to, you know, discuss work related, scheduling appointments, maybe even a follow up and a wellness check. Like when it comes to the severity of a telephone call, you know, can we keep calm in that situation? Can we still gather information while not feeling like we're being rushed, right? Of course, when it comes to like communicating through a text message, that message may be interpreted different depending on who you're speaking to. But over the telephone, it may be a little bit more clear on how that tone conveys how they feel when they're saying that. So keeping that in mind, that it still applies even if it is over the phone. So, communication technology, this is something you absolutely have to assess within yourself as well. As you know, there's so many different forms of technology out there that you guys can see and list here. But I just want to talk about maybe some important things in regards to that. So, one, I know we just talked about telephone, but even thinking about, you know, does your agency, some agencies have like access for their coworkers to have two phones. So of course you have your personal phone, but then you also have your work phone. So keeping that in mind, right? Like, is your personal phone off limits to communicate with clients? If so, that's so important. You may not want to give them your personal number. They may contact you on your personal number outside of hours, and now you feel obligated. Especially if it's an emergency, it is your obligation to follow up with that. You can't just ignore something like that. So typically when individuals have work phones, they may be like on call. So, you know, it gives like a certain amount of boundary as to who needs to respond during that time. Um, but also, you know, if you are using your personal phone and you're texting with the client or speaking with the client, it can totally be brought up again, you know. Maybe your agency lawyer wants to pull those records on the text message conversation. That's their right, you know, especially if an incident takes place. So that's why I say it's always best to avoid that if you can, not using your personal information. Not using your personal email, you know, really just sticking to your work email. I know it's not always as easy as that, and if you feel like you do have any conflict or concerns around that, absolutely ask your supervisor what should we do in the situation, because you want to make sure that you are being, you know, setting those boundaries as best as you can. So video technology, we talked a little bit about, you know, RayTube as far as if you're doing telehealth with the client, making sure that you understand the client's location, right? Are they in the same state as me? If they're not, you may not have the credentials to have that counseling session with them because you're not in the same place, you know. So thinking about that, also thinking about you know, what are you going to do if there is a client crisis through a Zoom conversation? You know, making sure that they have those next steps laid out so that you have absolute plan to move forward, because it could happen. Also making sure, you know, if you are presenting an intake session via Zoom, that when you're talking about maybe the confidentiality documentation, that you share that with your client, right? You don't just say, hey, you know, I mailed you those documents, go ahead and send them back. Like, we want to go through that with them. We want to make sure that they have an understanding on what it is they're signing. We may go through each step with them. You know, we want to make sure that they feel empowered. Sometimes documentation like that can be overwhelming. Maybe your client doesn't know how to read, you know, like, we don't want to embarrass them. We don't want them to feel like less than, even, you know, at the start of a session. So please keep that in mind as far as how you are communicating with your clients. And I always tell this to students, um, folks, your clients can literally Google you. So keeping that in mind, do a Google search on yourself and make sure you know what's out there as far as, you know, your name. Of course, there can be things that are personal. You may not want that to be out there. So keep that in mind. And then, of course, the National Association of Social Workers does share that we should not be Google searching our clients before meeting them. It's just not necessary. It's not important. Um, there is a rare case where you may Google search your client, maybe if it's a situation of crisis and you have to maybe gather more information, but for the most part, absolutely not. Okay. So social media, this is huge. Everything that's posted out there is permanent. I kind of chuckle a little bit at that because I know when I was younger and I had Facebook, I just would like share meaningless things like going on a walk today. Like, that's great. But like looking back on it is like, did everybody need to know that I was going on a walk today? Like, maybe not. But that's obviously a low level instance, but there could absolutely be high level instances in regards to posts that people make. Sometimes people are passionate and want to post about politics and what policies that they maybe just came out and their opinions on those policies. Um, be mindful of that. You just don't know who follows who. You don't know who can see what information that you have on there, whether that's how you feel now, it may not be how you feel later. So just be mindful of what you post. Some individuals have access to their agency social media page. So, if you're just posting your opinion on there, does now everybody who's following that page think that that's the agency's like view on that particular issue? So keep that in mind. Like, you are not the voice of your agency, and it really can impact the amount of clientele that feel comfortable even coming to that agency in the first place. So be intentional. That's just the biggest thing that I can say. It's permanent. You just don't know who's going to see that. So something else to keep in mind is don't post out of emotion. I know that I kind of just said that in different words, but there are absolutely times where we just don't want to speak out of our emotion. We just don't know, again, who sees it and what the impact it can have on other clients or even those above you at your agency. Okay, communication technology. So address technology as it relates to both competent and ethical practice. Um, just knowing that there can be clients that are not on the same page as you. So in this slide, I really want you just to refer to your code of ethics, really making sure that you guys have communication and understanding on the different documentation that you can use in social work and the impact that really can have on your client. So just making sure that okay, there's so many different forms of documentation that can be used, one, but also two, we have to ethically make sure we clearly communicate these to them, and that they have an understanding of the services that you guys are going to present. Telehealth, we talked about this as well, but just to elaborate a little bit more, a lot of the things that can be done face to face can also be done online, and that's really also a testament to COVID. Of course, there's so many horrible things that happen through COVID, but one of the things we may have realized as social workers is that there are a lot of things that we can do online as well. That's why you see a lot of this kind of new career path in regards to remote work and the different ways that you can still support a client through online. Maybe someone doesn't feel comfortable being face to face. So it really is a benefit to us as social workers to engage in this kind of work. But it's great that we have another option as well to have that face to face option. So, as you can see here, I listed telehealth can be used in counseling setting, maybe a home visit. Maybe you can just, Zoom with a client and see their setting and what they're going through there. Um, Consultation with colleagues, great way for you to communicate through colleagues, just literally through Zoom. We've done that before in class settings. Research, a lot of that can be done online. Supervision of interns, that one could be a little bit harder. I think it can absolutely be done, but I think like that personal face-to-face observation does mean a lot. And then of course, social work education, whether that's a lecture, whether that's a class online, there's so many different avenues of telehealth. Okay, so communication challenges. We know that there could absolutely be challenges in communication. We talked about how we may have to redirect the conversation, but also having to maybe de-escalate the conversation. So this is very important, and if you have not, experienced having to de-escalate an intense conversation, um, I want you to think about what you would do, maybe even practicing in the mirror of how you could communicate that. You want to come across as like serious. You don't want to come across like in a joking manner as if you're unsure or you're laughing. I think everybody has different defense mechanisms when they communicate or just in general, right? And we don't want to come across as not understanding, not being sympathetic in that particular time. So practice that if you have not experienced that. There are also times where clients may cry uncontrollably. So what do you do in that time, right? Are we having a moment of silence to just let them kind of get through what they're going through? Maybe silence is too long. Maybe you let it go on for a minute, right? That does give you a cue maybe to say something, right? Um, Active listening, of course, but really reflecting back on the things that you heard. I think in a situation of crying is important. Not putting words in their mouth, really acknowledging their feelings in that time and allowing them to express how they feel as well. And then one other thing with communication is just not rushing the conversation. Don't just say, "Oh, I got the solution for you. I heard you. I heard you talk for 3 minutes, and I already know what to do." Like, I had another client that did what you did, and this no. Like, give everybody a chance. Don't rush their situation. Again, positive confrontation, right? Not just assuming something, not just confronting them on the issue at hand, actively listening and directing that focus to what they had to say. So please do so. Okay, so communication skills and field professionalism, we talked about that. There are so many different ways that you can exhibit professionalism. So keep that in mind, of course, with your language, the way you dress, maybe informal conversation. We want to still make sure that we are being professional when we do speak with our coworkers, our clients.